rent.
That's why
this is the payback.
That's right. And you know, it's a real treat. When I was putting together this panel, it made sense, of course, to have the Barn Find Hunter. It made sense to have Wayne Carini. If you don't know who Peter Kumar is from Going Motor Cars right now, in an hour and so, you will completely not only know who Peter Kumar is, you will understand why so many people in the industry respect him. Peter Kumar, Going Motor Cars, thanks for joining us. Peter is not a professional, by the way, which is why he was talking without the microphone in his hand. So you still got to hold the microphone in your hand.
Thank you.
So,
This is how this works, Peter.
so now we know why the other two are on TV and Peter lives in New York. So, you know, this phenomenon did not exist when I was young, of the barn find. I think they were just kind of abandoned cars at that point. Tom, when did things change where barn finds became desirable and valuable versus just kind of derelict vehicles you would see on the side of the road?
For me, it never did exist. I mean, I remember I was probably 8 when I found what I think was a Model A Roadster. It could have been a 32 Ford. And I tried to talk a friend into bringing it home with me so I could put bicycle wheels in the front and snow tires in the back and make a hot rod out of it, and he wouldn't help me. But the first barn find I bought, I was 14, it was a 1940 Ford convertible that I bought for 25 bucks from Charlie's Welding Shop at Rocky Point on Long Island, which is to your right, 25 bucks. Because Lumpy on Leave It to Beaver drove one, and I fell in love with the car that Lumpy drove.
Hold on a second. So Tom Cotter's television hero at the time was Lumpy Rutherford, rather than like Eddie Haskell or Wally?
Well, I don't remember the cars they drove, I just remember the car he drove. So, I don't know who invented the term barn find, but I'm so happy that somebody did, because it's kind of taken everything that I've lived for from my whole life and put it into one nice tiny little term. It used to be vintage tin. Rod and Custom magazine had a column called Vintage Tin, and I fell in love with this column. I was 12, 13 years old, and it was about these California guys go into the desert and bring home deuce roadsters they find sitting next to a cactus. And I'm on Long Island, dealing with rust and bloody knuckles and stuff, and I was kind of dreaming of being a California barn find hunter, or at the time, a vintage tin hunter.
You know, Wayne, your TV show is called Chasing Classic Cars. You have a new magazine called The Chase. This concept of you chasing things actually starts when you're, I was going to say little, but younger. Okay. So,
You're real funny.
When did this start?
My dad restored cars for a living when I was growing up. My father was the founder of the Model A Restorers Club in 1951. And we'd go out for rides on Sundays, and that was our job in the car, was to look behind every house, every barn, everything to see if we could see a car. And so we really had barn finds back then, of course, and of course my father rewarded my sisters and myself, and then we'd always say, well, I saw it first, you didn't see it, I saw that, I just didn't speak up. But it turned out to be a really great way of spending the afternoon driving around. My father would find a car every once in a while, so yeah. And we've always been in that mode in our family.
It's amazing. Obviously, we talk regularly. We were talking about Hershey and trying to figure out who had been to Hershey the most. And Wayne, you obviously had beaten all of us because, you first showed up at what time?
1957, started going to Hershey. I was 6 years old, and when I turned 10, though, was really the turning point. So my dad, that was about 1961, and my dad would put a sandwich board sign on me with cardboard with rope tied around and a crayon in my pocket, and he wrote down all the parts he was looking for, and then wrote the space number down on the cardboard too. Said, in case you get lost, you tell people that's the space you're looking for, and he'd send me off with the crayon, and the crayon was for the person that said he had that part, so they could write their space number down, and I'd report back at lunchtime, And then my father would say, "What'd you find?" And we'd go out and buy it. I found some buffalo wire wheels for a Saxon once, and my father thought that was the greatest thing in the world. And of course, at Hershey, I got a double ice cream that night. That was my payoff, finding the buffalo wire wheels. So I've been doing this for a long time, and finding cars in back of houses, and then finding the parts down at Hershey. But Hershey was a wonderful place where before you pull into town 10 or 15 miles outside of town, it smelled like chocolate. It was one of the most wonderful places in the world, I'll tell you.
How about before it was paved, though, and it rained every year? Remember that?
Oh no, there was no pavement, there was nothing. Of course, across the street was the airport where Mr. Hera would fly his plane in every year. So I had the biggest Hershey moment in my life, and this has got nothing to do with barn finds.
All right, go ahead.
I'm talking.
You're the movie star.
Bill Hera, as probably a lot of you know, was the greatest car collector of our century. Bill loved cars, and he was just such a great collector, real tall guy, and he was known to me as Mr. Hera. And one year he took a car called the Julian, which was made actually in Long Island. It was an aero-powered car, and had a rotary engine in the back. And he brought the Bugatti Royale town car. And at the end of the show, my dad had sold him a few cars and parts, and I was standing there, and he said, "Hey, would your son like to go for a ride up to the tractor trailer in the Royale?" So I sat in Bugatti Royale with Bill Hera driving the car. And of course, there was no cell phones back then. Brownie camera, maybe, and that was about it. They were chiseling it in stone.
That's about probably the era. Peter, your story's a little different from these two guys because, before 19 you were in New Delhi, right?
Yes.
And you go to England and do what?
I was cleaning cars at my uncle's showroom.
And by cleaning cars, you mean like washing them and?
Yeah, washing them and cleaning them, like cleaning anything. Cleaning cars, yes.
And what did that teach you about the automotive industry?
Well, I was selling parts before in India at my father's shop. I used to go there part-time. And my uncle paid for my ticket. He said, "I'll find you a job." So my first job was cleaning older Mercedes-Benz. He had a Mercedes showroom, pre-owned cars. My uncle told me that you are cleaning Mercedes-Benz.
Why are you lucky?
Well, he said when he came to this country in England in 1962 or 63, he was, I think, cleaning Fords. He started so
everything for you, Peter, changes when you get to the United States. You get to, I think, Miami.
Yes.
What happens when you get there?
Well, my uncle had a small place that we were shipping cars, so we were just buying and selling cars. Didn't make any money. He says, "Sell that place. I'll give you a place to stay and gotta do whatever you want." So I started buying Ford Pintos, VW Rabbits, MGBs, Ford Granada, Ford Future. So I was buying and selling cars. And for 6 months, I delivered pizza in Miami Beach.
So you were delivering pizza and selling cars nobody wanted to buy.
Yes.
So where does that Gullwing moniker come from?
Gullwing, I was 1 Evans on Northwest 7th Avenue. I still remember the address. So I saw a silver colored Gullwing with the wings open, price tag $84,000. Looks like a show car. And that's when I fell in love with the Gullwing.
$84,000 for a Gullwing was probably a lot of money back then?
Yes, absolutely.
Now that would be
1.5 million.
1.5 million. Do you, Tom, as you think back in your career of looking for cars, because this really wasn't even a career, this was just something you did for fun, right? What is the visceral sensation in your stomach when you see something that you can't identify, but you want to know?
You mean finding a car, I don't know what it is? That can't happen. In fact, one of the things I love doing the most on Barn Find Hunter is if a car is covered in a building, covered up for a long time, don't uncover it. And I go around and feel it, and I try to identify what it is, and then see if I'm right or not. And one was like really an odd one. It was an Italia, which,
Like a Triumph Italia or
What, Hudson?
No, an Italia like the Ford-powered,
Oh, okay.
Ford-powered 19,
Intermechanical.
set of gears.
Like gear.
Like, yeah.
Yes.
That was a tough one, but I got it. So It's no problem.
So we have a new game show. If any of you in the audience are in the entertainment industry, Tom Cotter feels things through a sheet. Sure to be popular in the Hasidic community. Wayne,
Love it.
what are you thinking about when you're, on your next chase?
It's so much fun and so exhilarating to think, of course people call you, and the one call I think that we should talk about is the Stutz Bearcat. So this guy calls me one day and he says, I found this Stutz Bearcat in this barn in Statesboro, Georgia. And when somebody says that, you think, okay, it's probably a Volkswagen, with a kit car somehow, and he's calling it a Stutz. So I said, do you have any pictures of the car? He says, no, I don't have any pictures, but it's really a Stutz. Really? The guy told me it was a Stutz Bearcat. So I said, take pictures of the car, I'll pay you $2,500. And he goes, well, geez, I'm 500 miles away. I said, okay, $3,000. And so he went 2 days later, took pictures, and I couldn't believe it was a Stutz Bearcat. So we made a deal where I flew down with my crew the next day and we filmed, and it was so exciting to open the door of the barn, see that car sitting in there. It had been sitting in there since 1931. I think that's just such a cool thing. It's not so much buying it, it's just the experience of finding it.
I mean, is there a little bit of Indiana Jones going on here, where you're kind of uncovering this artifact from the past, and maybe somebody hasn't seen it in a long time, or at least the general public hasn't seen it, where you really think you're performing this kind of just necessary function to kind of unearth these treasures?
People call me
People call you lots of stuff.
Yeah, well, the ultimate barn find collector, archaeologist of automobiles. But it's really cool to be able to find something like that, and then bring it back to life too. So bring it back and get it running again. So the Stutz was parked in that barn because the head was off of it, and the head was off of it because gasoline was so bad there was a huge carbon buildup in the car. So if it wasn't for bad gas back then, the car probably would have been restored and had gone on to 20 different owners. But it sat in that barn because it just wouldn't run correctly, and it was knocking, and the head was off.
It's amazing, Peter, you kind of got inspired by this Gullwing you saw down in Miami. How many Gullwings have you sold now? Is it exciting for you when you sell the 101st or you find the 101st?
Absolutely, same feeling.
How do you find, and by the way, if you know how to read, which would account for most of you except for the chowder member there, you have seen Peter's ads in all the publications. Wanted, Alfa Romeo and AC, and going on down the list, call Peter Kumar Gullwing. Is that where most of your leads come from, or are they organic, where people say, hey, Peter, I saw X in some place? Where are your finds?
And also we have a lot of repeat finders, brokers that have been dealing with them for like 25 years, 30 years. So it's all mixture.
The question is, of course, and I always think, a couple years ago, I think now, I had that white 275 GTB. It's a very original car. Do you ever think that, they've all run out, Tom, where every car out there has been found, or is it just there's an endless supply?
Endless supply. I mean, people always imagine, oh, you found the last car. It's the last one. There's none left. I promise you, I would make a bet that within 1 hour, I could find a car somewhere in this region right here without much trouble. I think, by the way, I just met Peter for the first time, but I've been pissed at him for years. I see his ads, and these cars were found probably in the New York area, I'm not sure, but maybe. But the prices are always reasonable, I have to say that, which makes me so angry because you bought it for much less. And you're making a hell of a profit.
Little less, not much less.
Peter has very small margins, very small margins.
Peter's theory is that half a chicken is better than no chicken at all.
Exactly.
But there's no end to the amount of cars out there. And in fact, as the older collectors begin to leave, they go to nursing homes or they pass on, you know, their families are stuck with dad's stuff in the garage. What are we going to do with all dad's stuff? And so there's always new cars coming onto the market. And, you know, the days I think of the Duesenbergs coming on the market and Stanleys and, you know, those kind of cars, those are probably over. But we're very much in the era of, you know, 40s and 50s and 60s cars coming back on the market that have been hidden away by earlier collectors than we. They've been hidden away for decades. I bet Wayne could vouch for that.
Absolutely, you know, and sometimes you hear of a car. So I heard of this going, and it was in Massachusetts, and so I was given an approximation of the territory it was, and I narrowed it down to one road, and it was the main road going through Agawam, Massachusetts, right by Riverside Park, and so I drove up and down that road so many times, looking and hoping that the garage door would be open or something. And I couldn't understand where it was. And I narrowed it down to basically a mile stretch of Route 5 in Agawam, Massachusetts. And then finally, the person wanted to sell the car. The husband had passed away, the woman wanted to sell it. So Peter calls me and he says, anything new, what's going on? I said, yeah, I just found it going. What do you mean you found it going? Where? I want to come with you. So we went together, and it was the wildest thing. When they gave me the address finally, and I went past that house probably 200 times. It was a broken down house, full of junk. The guy was a hoarder, and there was 3 or 4 cars parked out in front, trees growing up in front of the garage door, and that would be the furthest place I think there was a going in that garage. It had a little padlock on it. If you hit it with a hammer, the padlock would have fallen off the garage. And there was a going inside, and Peter was with me. We raised that door. What a feeling. And that car was so special because we're trying to determine, there's so much junk piled all over it, trying to determine how many miles were on it. So I said 25,000 miles, I think, wasn't it, Peter? About 25,000 miles. And I said to the woman, I said, oh, that must have turned over once already. She goes, no, I don't think so. I think that's original. Yeah, okay. Well, we pulled the seat up, the driver's seat, and there was a logbook underneath the driver's seat with every gasoline drop the guy had ever put in the car, written down how much he paid per gallon, you know, and there it is, the last time he filled it up, which was about 8 to 10 years beforehand, and was like 20 miles more on the car than was listed, and it really was 25,000 miles.
Do you remember that funny sticker on the side of the...
Oh yeah. You won't say that.
Oh.
It's okay. Peter's new to this. You can't say anything like I just said about 10 minutes ago, Peter.
It's all the guns here. It was pretty funny though.
Yeah. Well, we can say that later.
If you want to actually find out what it was, just come up to Peter later. You know, you really, because you know, you're a professional, you do this a lot. Is there one barn find that you've had, Peter, that stands out above the rest?
Yes, a 275 GTB I bought in Kalamazoo, Michigan in 2007 or 2006.
And what was so special about this car?
So special, sitting in my barn garage, but I don't want to sell it. I said, you're calling me. He said, I just want to know when I'm ready. I said, yeah, absolutely. He said, but the windshield is somewhere else, transmission is somewhere. So finally he starts calling me. He said, the transmission is at my daughter's in Virginia, windshield is here. I said, well, I'll go to Virginia, pick up the transmission and bring it to you if you want. He said, no, I'll bring everything and I'll call him. So he calls me. He says, I said, okay. He said, but how do I know that you're a buyer? I said, I'm absolutely a buyer. He said, I will only send me $25,000 non-refundable deposit.
Before you've seen the car?
Before I seen the car. I said, what? He said, yes, you have to send me very nice guy, by the way. $25,000. I said, what about the price? I'm not telling you the price. If you are serious, you come to Kalamazoo, look at the car. I said, give me an account number. So he gave account number. At that time, we were not doing wires on the phone. I went to the bank, did the wire. 3 hours later, he said, call your bank. I said, why? I said, just call your bank, see if you have the money. Call the bank, 25. Money's in. He said, I'm going to use the wire. He said, are you crazy? He said, how do you know I have the car? I said, trust me. So he had the car. I went there, looked at the car. It's been sitting for God knows maybe 40 years. That was my best barn find story.
Oh my God. Wired to somebody without even knowing it was a car.
Sometimes I'll give Peter leads, and so I can't remember where exactly it was, but I gave Peter a lead to go find a car, and I thought it was all done. I thought he bought the car and stuff, and he calls me like 4 days later, and he says, I'm still here. I said, still where? Still exactly at the same place you sent me. He says, I'm not going to go home until I buy this car. And the guy keeps saying, maybe tomorrow, maybe tomorrow. He was there for 2 weeks in a hotel room waiting for the guy. He says, I'm not going home until I own it.
Roadster and a 507 BMW.
Yeah, I mean, so he's committed when he goes to buy a car, sort of like I am, Tom is, where cars really do it for us, and especially when it's a barn find, stuff that is about, that's so exciting.
Wayne, the stuff is obviously one hand, but I am amazed just, having been around enough to see how much great stuff you get on a daily basis. That one in New York where the guy had, the Bentley, all these great cars. How are they coming to you? I mean, you're not advertising like Peter is, right?
Oh, I get the best advertisement in the world. It's called television. People call me constantly. They send me emails. I mean, listen, I probably get 20 leads a day. Now, most of them are for 1929 Age or 32 Buick or something like that that's rusted up to the door handles. But every once in a while, there's great leads. I bought a Porsche the other day, 72 911T. The guy called me 3 years ago. I want to sell the car. He sends me pictures. Look at the pictures. I said, geez, it's really in great condition. He said, yeah, it's all original. I said, all original? I said, that paint's original? He says, well, of course not. I said, well, you said it was all original. He says, did you think the oil would still be original in the car? He says, that's part of maintenance. And I go, okay. We negotiate a price. I get his bank account number, and I send him the money, and he sends it back. He said, well, I called him. I said, what's this all about? He says, I changed my mind. I can't do it. Okay. He called me 2 weeks ago. He says, I'm ready. I said, well, okay. What's that mean, ready? He says, right now. If you send me the money. I said, how much? He says, the same amount of money we agreed on 3 years ago. I mean, it was crazy. And so I sent him the money, and I have the car. 60,000 mile 911T, one owner. It's like brand new, except for it's been painted once, and the oil's been changed to car.
So, Tom, I think one of the most attractive things about you, in an automotive sense, is that you're this kind of amateur barn find. At least, you're doing this out of the sheer pleasure, the Olympic athlete of barn find hunters, as opposed to these two mercenary guys sitting next to you. How are you doing it? I mean, where are you finding the things that you're finding? I mean, I picture, when I think about, sometimes sitting in California and wondering what Tom Cotter's doing, I'm picturing you driving a wagon in the hinterlands, just driving around, kind of looking from side to side, kind of trying to peer behind someone's garage door. Is that the fact, or is that the myth?
That's pretty much the case. I don't fish, but if I did fish, I'd catch a really cool fish and I'd throw it back in the water. I don't buy these cars. It's interesting you have this comparison where I find them, don't buy them. He buys them and sells them, and he does both. So like Wayne is the perfect guy to sit in the middle because he's doing, I'm finding them, he's finding them, he buys them. So, but it's that's what I do. I don't care about owning them. I've had so many cars. At one moment I had 14 Woodies, just Woodies alone, So I'm trying to thin down my car count, but I don't need to own them except once in a rare while. Like, that Country Squire station wagon with the 4-speed, was that thing bitching or what? I mean, that was a one-of-one car. I had to own it. I've found Cobras and Ferraris, but when you open that garage door, you don't know if it's a rusty Corvair or you don't know what it is. It is what it is, and I love finding all of them because to me, it's not about the sheet metal and the hardware. It's about the human interest story and how that person owned it. Oh, you got it in high school. Oh, your aunt gave it. Oh, and she bought it new. I love that human interest story as much as I love, or probably more than I love the actual sheet metal, because I tell the people at Hagerty, I don't want to go to a junkyard because junkyards have no stories; they just have inventory. The junkyard owner doesn't know, the story of that Nash Healy that's sitting there. But if you went to a guy's garage who had one car and it was a Nash Healy, he could tell you all about that car, and that's what I love, is to dig out that story. But let me just say this quickly. The biggest upset that I had, I live in Charlotte, North Carolina now, is when American Pickers was coming to town and they put out a press release. Show us what you got. Send us your photos digitally, and so I realized, holy crap, they don't ride down the road looking for cars. All they do is they send a search team out and they look at the stuff you have, whether it's an old telephone or an old truck, and they negotiate prices ahead of time and all that stuff, and then they just show up and do the show business part. And I decided I never want to be a part of that. Like, if you send me leads, I love you, but I probably won't use them, because I just like to go to a town and do it the way your dad did it way back in the old days, is going to meet the garage mechanic and ask him, who's a guy in town that's got old cars? And then I go to his house, knock on his door, and he tells you who another guy is. I knock on his door, and before you know it, you got 5 episodes in the bank.
Yeah, you can go to a diner and just ask, who's the greatest car guy in town, or a barber shop, something like that, and that's the most fun. I pitched that idea to Discovery Channel. They didn't like it very much, but maybe we'll still do it if there's another new network coming out. You never know.
A lot of intrigue on this panel. Tom, and by the way,
No, excuse me. Don't send Tom any leads anymore. You send them to me or Peter.
Give it to
Tom, he can find them on his own. He's good.
by the way, I know Peter well, and I have never seen you more excited in my life than when Tom said, I don't buy them, I just find them, because Peter's thinking, I got another person.
Exactly.
But, if you've not read Tom's series of books, go out and find them. They're certainly out there. They all kind of start with or end with In the Barn, The Cobra in the Barn, and Tom, what are the other titles?
I think I have 11 now. The newest one will be out at Amelia Island, I hope. It's The Secrets of the Barn Find Hunter. And so it just tells me really the whole life of my finding cars, how I do it, other experts in the field, photographs where I could get them. So that'll be the newest one. But Cobra in the Barn, Ferrari in the Barn, Vincent in the Barn, Hemi in the Barn, 50 Shades of Rust, on and on.
And you can tell Tom's intense lack of imagination. Right. And just to give equal opportunity, at Wayne Carini's booth, which is just across the show field, Wayne has just published a book called Wayne Carini's Guide to Affordable Classic Cars. Volume 1 is out now. There will be several subsequent volumes where Wayne shares his secrets and profiles 25 different collectible cars. And Peter will be writing something soon, right?
Hopefully.
Okay, there you go. So, Peter, what is the one kind of tip? If anybody out in this audience, oh my God, it's really kind of grown. If anybody in this audience decides that they want to follow or emulate the kind of road you took to kind of becoming this leading figure in the hobby, what would you tell them?
They take his car.
Exactly. And I was running after the car.
Why?
So he's been through a
I
lot.
thought I can catch the guy. But he was driving and I was running.
Have you ever seen a race?
Yes, I have.
I mean, Wayne, same question. I mean, what would you tell people if they wanted to kind of be a barn find hunter and try to find these kind of hidden gems?
Well, you just got to go out and you got to make yourself known, and that you're looking for that type of stuff. So go to a car show. It's sort of like somebody said, well, how can I be like you in the future? They said, well, just get a car, go out, go to a car show like today here at Greenwich, talk to as many people as you possibly can, introduce yourself. It's pretty easy. It took me a lot of years to get to the point where I am, and I was just really lucky. Donald Osborne wrote an article about my finding a Hudson Italia in our town of Portland and buying it. I chased the car from when I was 16, I bought it when I was 52, and Donald Osborne wrote an article which appeared in the New York Times about that. And Jim Ostrowski, who had my production company, read that article and called me the next day and said, I'd like to do a TV show about you, and that was 18 years ago. So it was that simple, and you never know. Now we're in 54 countries around the world, and millions of people watch. We're the highest rated car television show in the world, and the most continuously watched show over the years. Mike Brewer's got in second place, so that's okay for Mike.
And I do kid you a lot, obviously, but you know, you are the most beloved figure out there, and it's amazing to see how many people from other countries love you. You know, I'm presuming you're dubbed in all these different places.
Valentino Balboni, everybody probably knows, is the test driver for Lamborghini. And every year when I see him, he says, "You know, in Italy, you're more famous than the Pope."
Because the Pope just rides around, he doesn't know how to drive.
That's right, he's not a car guy. Although he did have a Yugo, right? Yeah.
You need to have the blessing of the Pope to keep a Yugo running, you know. It's Tom, you know, obviously, I think Peter's like Zen. Tom, aren't you writing a book about Zen and the art of something?
That was the working title, but it's not anymore.
Okay, so as Peter says, follow your heart, I'm thinking about your book because, I mean, it really actually is good advice. What would you tell people?
You gotta kind of wear that face every day. If you're looking for old cars, you can't. I gotta say, I've never played golf in my life. I've fished twice. I don't hunt. I don't watch football. I'm a one-trick pony. So if I go to a wedding or a party, I'm either the most boring guy there or the most exciting guy there, depending who else is there, because I can only talk about one thing. So, as cars made, and talk to everybody you know. Just bring it up casually. I find that driving an old car leads to finding old cars. I drive this old Woody that I found on Long Island, right over there, on Wicks Road in Brentwood. I bought it for $300 in 1969. So I bought that before I had a driver's license. I drive that around, and at gas stations, at restaurants, at hotels, just everywhere. People, what are you doing? How come you have North Carolina plates and you're here in Kansas or you're here in California? Oh, I'm looking for old cars. And I said, okay, that's interesting. But they can't think of anybody. But you give them a card, and son of a gun, they call you the next day. You know, I thought about what you do. You look for old cars. My aunt's got one in her backyard when my uncle died. So I'm convinced everybody knows where an old car is. It just takes a little bit of mining. So if you go to a wedding, ask about old cars. If you go to a funeral, ask about old cars. You know, you gotta do it if you want.
You must be a very interesting wedding guest.
I just left a funeral and I'm here at a wedding now. Looking for old cars.
You know, we do have a very big crowd out there, and typically we've been allowing about 10 minutes for Q&A. I understand, given the fact that we have these three, some of you may actually want to talk to them. So what I'm going to do is, if you actually have a question for any one of our three panelists, or just for all of them, please raise your hand. We have a microphone in the audience, and I'm sure Tom, Wayne, or Peter will be glad to give you the benefit of their decades in finding barn finds.
Don't accept any questions from the second row. Okay? From that side to that side, don't accept any questions, okay?
Look like nice people.
They're not.
I see a couple of guys here from Long Island. They must
Why did I say Kevin McKay can't ask any questions if we're going to go there? So, anybody have a question for our panel?
Yeah. Oh, second row. Here
It's
it
all right,
comes.
Dana. Let it go. Let him go.
Have agencies like Alex Manos taken a piece of the pie of collector cars? Because if you send them a picture and a copy of your title, they'll send you a check and pick up the car.
Who?
It's Alex Manos.
Who?
Yeah. By the way,
I don't know that guy.
Exactly.
I have no idea who you're talking about. Peter really doesn't know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
I think there's room for everybody in this business. You got to be honest and credible. Just because you got a check, basically you need to be a good human being, which that's all I would say. Nothing else.
So,
And I can vouch, he's number one.
it really is amazing. You wouldn't think used car dealer would rise to the ranks of the most trusted people in the world. In this case, Peter, you are literally the most trustworthy guy in the hobby. anything else. We
I
have,
want to point out something in the audience if I could. If I could just point out Kevin McKay. Raise your hand, Kevin. Kevin McKay owns Corvette Repair, another Long Island guy, and had been looking for one specific car for decades. The number one 1960 Corvette that the Briggs Cunningham team brought to Le Mans. The number 2 car was found, the number 3 car was found, the number 1 car had escaped his vision, his sight, his whereabouts. He knew what town it was in, he knew what street it was on. He'd walk back and forth up and down this alleyway, trying to peek in garages. And I think he hired a fortune teller or something, a seancer guy or something to tell where's in the garage, and ultimately found that car. I gotta say that is an amazing feat. So, gang, that's one of the most successful barn find hunters in the world.
Dana, can you actually give the microphone to Kevin really quick? I actually want to ask a question. And Wayne, I think you had a diviner in your family, is that right?
What?
A diviner where you
Oh yeah, my grandfather used to find water with a dividing rod. I mean, so the stick off of a willow tree, and he found wells all over our town, 15, 20 feet deep.
So Kevin, did you do something like that? What was the process?
On finding certain cars?
No, on finding that car in particular, because that's a very
Oh, that car
obviously
is,
famous car.
Well, what happened was basically that I had a very good friend of mine named Ed Mueller, who was at the time the #1 Corvette collector in the world. In 1980, he had one of the original Grand Sports. He had a 1967 L88 that went to Le Mans. And I had dinner with him one night. I did a lot of work for him for 17 years in business. And I said, Ed, let me look at that documentation on this 67 L8 Le Mans car. And I'm going through it, and on the inspection sheet had the actual serial number of the car. I said, Ed, how the hell did you get this? He goes, I wrote to Le Mans. And then I'm wondering, 1960 was the first effort for Corvette to go over to Le Mans. There were 3 Cunningham cars and 1 private entry car called the Camarati car, the number 4 car. So I'm gonna write to Le Mans. So I wrote to Le Mans. About 6 months later, I had dinner with Ed again. I said, Ed, I wrote to Le Mans, I got nothing back. What'd you do it in French? I don't know French. So I went to a French school, took the letter that I did in English, converted over to French, and in good gesture, I sent a bouquet of flowers. And 3 months later, I get a fax copy of all the Corvettes that raced Le Mans in 1960. I had the Holy Grail in my hand. It was unbelievable. I went after it. One car was found in California, owned by a guy named Mike Pillsbury, who passed away. Eventually ended up with Bruce Meyer's collection. The number 3 car was in St. Louis. An airline pilot owned that. And the number 1 car was owned last time to a guy named Jerry Elmore out of Tampa, Florida. So after 19 years search, I found the car. It kind of fell in our lap. That's another good story. Matter of fact, tonight on Autobiography, they're having the return of the Cunningham Corvettes on 9 o'clock tonight. So you guys are available, watch it. I haven't seen it yet, but I heard it's supposed to be pretty good. But we have the car in our possession, in our shop in Long Island, and we're restoring the car. Eventually we'll have all back together again. We don't know where it's going to be, whether it'll be at Pebble or the Island, or maybe here at Greenwich. We don't know yet, but we'll see what happens. But thank you.
We look forward to seeing it, Kevin. Dana?
For each of you, what do you personally believe will be a classic, say, of cars that have been in production in the last 20 years, 40 years from now, that will be regarded as, potential barn finds?
Can I guess that Wayne Carini will say CTSV?
Yeah, CTSV wagon. I think that's a great car. I have one sitting up on, I call it sitting up on the shelf. So I have certain cars that I don't want to touch, and so I have lifts and I put them up on the top shelf, and I don't touch them. So I've got a 2014 CTSV 6-speed station wagon with 8,000 miles on it, and it's sitting up on the shelf. I've recently bought some GT350Rs, all in the wrapper, under 10 miles, and they're on the shelf, because I think they're going to be great investments. And these are going to be barn finds. Can you imagine walking into a building and seeing all these cars up on the upper lift with no miles on them? That would just be insane. Maybe I could come back again after I die as something else. I could come back as Tom Cotter, and then I could go out and find these cars again. I'll be riding around in a CTSV wagon though instead of a 39 or 40 Ford wagon.
You're going a lot faster.
No, the one thing though about Tom, he could sort of do that. A lot of these guys do that. Guy Fieri doesn't drive his Camaro to all these restaurants. He gets it dropped off and then they just show it. So Tom's is the real deal.
Yeah, that really is. And so, Tom, what's your candidate for a car from the last 20 years will be collectible, say, 20 or 30 years from now?
You know, I think if we look at some of the Radwood stuff going on out there, that's it. I mean, I think that would be a preview out there. You know, when you see Toyota Supra going for more than $100,000, that's a good sign. I think, and I'm not thinking CTS. I'm thinking, you know, Volkswagen GTIs, you know, 2002 TIs, things like that. In my mind, it's these smaller sport performance sedans.
Peter?
Yes. I would say, I'm a Mercedes guy mainly. Later 560 SLs, Porsches, later 911s, I think they're going to keep on going up in the values. They were, of course, they were enough made, but this new generation can relate to those cars, older generation. So I would say these two cars.
Peter, is your inventory changing towards more modern vehicles as tastes change?
Not really. We are still following the same inventory, not like modern, like late. Yeah, we're going to late 80s now. Late 80s, up till late 80s.
So barn finds are going to be tougher to find because the barns are going away. So, I mean, we're going to be garage finds or warehouse finds, which are still out there. Yeah, I represent a company called Metrovac, and Tim Allen always says that what I do
Is
is
this a
I...
commercial plug?
Yes.
Wayne is the best pitchman in the industry, if you have not realized.
So Tim Allen always says that what I do is I take my Metrovac and I find a car in the garage and I reverse the vacuum and I blow dirt all over it, and then I get 50 grand more than what it's really worth.
You know, and I also want to say on behalf of Wayne that if you had a car capsule, that wouldn't be a problem because you wouldn't get any dust on your car.
Park it in there, it would be wonderful, it would be dust free.
And it would still be running if you use Craftsman tools.
Craftsman tools, and make sure you insure it by Haggerty.
There you go.
I think I got most of them. Oh, and make sure before you put it away, it's polished with
You would have been a good NASCAR driver, yeah.
I could just see him putting on the little hats, you know. Dana.
Oh, you don't have a question? Oh, he just said hi.
My question is for Peter. Peter, you said one of your most popular finds was a BMW 507.
No, there was 275 GTB.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
But you also had the 507.
Yes, I had a 507, yes.
Did you keep the 507 or did you just sell it?
You sold it to me.
Exactly. And that's right. You bought the blue one,
bought
yes.
it.
You know, actually, Peter, that reminds me. So, Tom, obviously we know you're an amateur, so you're excluded from this part of the conversation. Do you ever have, and Wayne, I'll ask you the same question, sentimental attachment to a piece of inventory?
Yes, especially the Gullwing. I bought my first Gullwing in '93 for the Dutizen Hemmings for $80,000, and I wish I could afford to, keep the car. Of course, it says it's a funny story. It says 80,000 or best offer. So we went to the dealership, me and my wife Monica. We went there. I said, will you take 70? He said 85,000. I said, you said $80,000 best offer. He said, yeah, best offer can be over my asking price. So agree to $85,000, buy the car. He said the owner wants 100,000. I said, you just told me 85. I said, but I'm not the owner, the salesman. He was a good salesman. So I ended up buying the car, which was advertised in Hemmings in 1993 for $80,000, and I paid 100,000 for the car. And the car was traded to a Chevrolet dealership. The guy came with bought a 1967 Corvette, gave him money and his Gullwing.
That wasn't such a good deal.
For him, yes.
Not a good deal at all. Wayne, how about sentimental attachments for you?
That's my big problem. I have a sentimental attachment for everything, and that's why the barn keeps growing and growing and growing. So, we have a new rule in our house: sell two and buy one. Well, I'm dyslexic, so it's buy two and sell one. Doesn't seem to be working. But Peter doesn't really have attachments, but Monica's got an attachment for cars. So she's got a beautiful 280 SE convertible. So.
Yeah, and by the way, the best half of the Kumar family is, of course, Monica.
Absolutely.
Who is a fantastic woman and obviously has to be married to Peter. Dana, in the middle of the aisle there.
I got a question. Recently, there's been a surgence in the JDM market, cars going up in value. Do you see that playing out or continuing up like other marks?
All depends on the car. I mean, you know, that style of car, absolutely. Oh, well, I mean, you know, Datsuns, I think, are really going to go anywhere. Wow. No, I'm only kidding because he's wearing a Datsun jacket. He's got a nice one right across the street, by the way.
Thank you.
That market is going to really grow and continue to grow. I mean, you know, we talked about it this morning. Nikhil talked about it with all the games, you know, so Forza and all these other things, and those are the type of cars that are in those games. And so that's what's driving the market is the young people grow up and they get jobs and are actually be able to afford to buy some of this stuff. Those are the cars that they've been dreaming of. So that market's going to continue.
You hit the nail on the head as far as that goes. Because the younger people I see, initially I'm like, how do they even know about this? And my friend said, it's in the game. I go, what game?
It's
I'm restoring a Datsun 510 that I bought in 1978.
They get good money.
You know, it's interesting if you were at that conversation this morning, how kids consume cars, of course, has changed because even for, you know, someone of my generation, it was in the pages of Road and Track and Car and Driver. And, you know, we had books and we saw them on the road. And now for kids, I think they're seeing them on video games or on the internet. It's just a very different way of consumption. But, you know, Peter, are you thinking more about Japanese domestic market models?
No. Thank you.
So,
These are for
shady
but I
stuff.
know.
Tom, I have a question for you because you are doing this, you know, for the spirit of the game, I guess, as you know, just for the love of doing it. Are you open to looking for anything, or are there certain things that you just don't care about finding?
This is a new book. In the book, I had to figure out what's fair game. And I have to tell you that, and I hope I don't offend anybody here, but there was that whole era of early GM front-wheel drive cars. And the Pontiacs, the Cadillacs, and I have no use for those cars at all. Nor, you have one? Oh, I'm sorry. And then, other thing are the Chrysler K cars. I know they're out there somewhere in that field, or somebody has one in a parking lot or at home and they love it. I don't. So there you go.
You know, talk about offending people. We've offended so many different groups throughout the course of this day. In one of the earlier panels, we actually had two different groups of people pissed off and walk out. So the Pontiac Aztec Owners Club, which was in strong attendance, left. And then we upset some BMW people. Is Lowell Paddock in this room yet?
No, I think I'm selling books.
Okay, there he is. So, you know, it's amazing. He's like Beetlejuice. If you say his name 3 times, Lowell Paddock will show up talking about the malaise area of General Motors cars. It's, you know, it's amazing because somebody said in the last panel, and it was Dave Kinney, so I'll actually quote him and use his profanity and blame it on him. You know, that there's an ass for every seat. There are cars out there that people find compelling that you may not. And I think that's one of the most interesting things about the hobby. You know, I've taken a lot of grief throughout the course of this day about my, you know, proclivity for British sports cars, which no one else seems to share out there. But, you know, that's what speaks to me. I don't want a car that will start every time. I don't want a car that doesn't just catch on fire sitting there. You know, I mean, that's right. I mean, that's okay, right?
Oh, I think so. I'm a British car guy too, so I get it.
Can you imagine now we're going forward 40 years and somebody says, there's this car in this garage, oh my gosh, it's been there since it was brand new, and you're picturing all the stuff, and what is it? Oh, I'm not quite sure, and then you get there and you open the door and it's an Aztec. Can you imagine how disappointing that would be? Oh my God, I'm sorry. Don't want to. Well, we're not picking on GM because right behind you is one of the greatest GM guys. Ed Welburn's here.
Oh my God!
Ed.
So Ed Welburn, by the way, you know, I actually got criticized earlier this morning for praising Ed too much. You know, someone said it was like a love fest. So, ladies and gentlemen, Ed Welburn is standing over on the right-hand side. If you don't know who Ed Welburn is, he was the head of global design at General Motors. He was only the 6th head of global design at General Motors. He is the only automotive designer in the world whose documents and drawings are contained in the Smithsonian Institute. And in the earlier panel today, we spent almost the entire time talking about the Pontiac Aztek, for which Ed's only comment was, it wasn't me, I was in Germany, it had nothing to do with the car. It was like listening to a Shaggy song, right? It had nothing to do with it, right? But we can blame people like Lowell Pat, like some of the GM. Stick around for about 10 more minutes, you'll get to hear us kind of pillory Lowell. But, you know, if there are cars out there that, you know, people will uncover, how is the fact that they are less susceptible to being brought back from the dead because they have so many electronics going to affect people's affection for them?
Can you imagine restoring an AMG Mercedes or some, 20 years from now, when the parts not available, all the service techs are gone, they're working on electric cars? It's gonna, if you think restoring an NSU now is tough, wait until 20 years from now when you try to restore something that's new now, forget it.
Absolutely. Absolutely true.
What do you think? I mean, it's funny, I was at F40 the other day, and you see on the floor just such a wide variety of vehicles, and there are a lot of more modern cars showing up in your lot. Do you think about the fact that these cars may not be running 20 years due to lack of parts?
There'll always be a way to figure it out. You'll always be able to get a computer made for the car. I mean, just because it's not on the shelf doesn't mean that it can't be reproduced. So we have to have a lot of faith. Now, it may not be financially the best thing to do. The car may not be worth what you have to put into it, and that happens on a daily basis anyways with every other car. I've got the faith that there's going to be plenty of people that will be able to fix these cars in the future, and I won't be here to worry about it anyway, so it makes no difference.
Anybody else out? Yeah, Dana, we got 2 on either side. Oh, we got one in the back.
Hi, just a quick question. I have we all have our love affairs with particular types of cars and all that. And for me, it happens to be the small old roadsters.
Can you hold the mic up?
I'm sorry. For me, it happens to be the small roadsters, convertibles like the Fiat Spider, Alfa Romeo, MGBs, and all that. I don't see that market. They still very affordable. They don't seem to kind of rise too much. Do you see a future in this kind of car? Because their lines are never to be seen again, and they're so unique. And I think they capture a lot of the heart that for a lot of automotive people. But I don't see the values go up accordingly. So do you see that market going up in the future?
If you go over to the Carini booth and buy this book, it's called Affordable Classics. We sort of touch on that subject, and we rate the cars. I think they're great cars. You mentioned Fiat, that's a little bit, but Alfa Romeo, there's the book now.
Ladies and gentlemen, for the low price of
$39.95,
you can get an autographed copy of this book, which is fabulously well written and features this grouchy little guy on the front in a Mole Speedster. No. And by the way, I absolutely love the cars you're talking about.
Yeah, they're good cars. They're really a lot of fun.
Tom?
And maybe the fact that they're not appreciating is a good thing, because it allows everybody to kind of jump in. It's kind of like the entry point for old car enthusiasm. So the fact that a B or a Fiat 124 rises more slowly than some other cars, to me, is a great thing.
It's really good for the market. I mean, Makio was talking this morning how young people aren't getting into the marketplace because cars are not affordable. You can't afford to be able to go out and buy a certain type of car. They've just got to change their thought process and try one of these cars. A Mazda Miata is a fantastic car to buy, a used car. I mean, it's so much fun. And a Fiat 124, an Alfa Spider, MGB Roadster, which was my second car I ever owned. And had in high school. Just great cars, a lot of fun, but they don't rise in value and probably won't very much. They'll just sort of go with the flow for a long time. But to be an affordable car for a young person to jump into the market, I think it's fabulous.
I want to ask you guys, what do you think about is going to happen?
Can you hold that closer?
What do you think is going to happen to some of the muscle cars now? Like, for instance, when I talked to my son and I said, look at that 69 Camaro pace car. He's like, yeah. Look at that CUDA 340. I mean, it's like, yeah. So basically, we have to wait to hope that the video games are going to continue to sustain this whole marketplace? Because the younger people don't seem to really find that same passion. In other words, we remember a point in our lives where that car was relevant, a memory, something that made it. But now when he looks at it, he doesn't have anything to really replace that with. So what is it going to have to be? That he saw it in a video game, so that's where that passion is going to have to be hatched from? Or?
I think if you find a young person, you put them in that car, and the minute they sit in it, they start the engine, they listen to it, or you let them drive it or take them for a drive. That's the most important thing right now is actually being, not video games. Video games are cool, but if you're actually there and you sit in the car and you go for a ride and you hear the engine and you smoke the tires. My grandson, so he's 5 years old last year, and I showed him how to smoke the tires in our Shelby GT350. And so he thinks this is the best thing in the world. We're down the driveway and all the smoke's pouring in the car, and it's so cool. So we have to go up and show Grandma. We have to drive up to the house, and everybody's sitting on the porch and watch us smoke the tires. So that type of thing. We're walking on the beach at Cape Cod that summer, and I walk down the beach, and Connor looks up at him and he says, "Hey, my name's Connor. This is Pop Tires." That's what you do, though, is get them hooked on little things. Go out and smoke the tires, or just take whatever it may be, but that'll do it.
We're going to do something real quick because Tom Cotter is such a celebrity. He has a book signing to attend. So, Tom, thank you so much for being here. Can we give him a big round of applause?
So, come to the road track train. I'll be there. I'm starting in 1 minute. Are we done now, John?
No, we're not done. So I'm going to give you 7 more minutes with Wayne and Peter, if you want that much. If not, you can kind of put your thumbs down. And we'll end this. But I think there are a couple more questions. Philip, I think you had a question, right?
The rest of the questions will be for Tom, and he's not here.
That's right.
Well, you got me a little confused now, which is normal.
Can you hold that closer to your mouth, Phil?
You got me a little confused now, which is kind of normal, you know me, but the previous seminar you had,
we had Steve Serio, Dave Kinney.
You had all these collectors, and then somebody says about Mercedes, and it's one of the outlier manufacturers that always have spare parts and will in the future and everything. And then Peter and Tom say, "Oh no, don't buy them in modern Mercedes." So that means I should sell one of you guys my AMG Edition 1 now before I can find parts for it later.
I don't buy AMGs, Mercedes. I stick to older ones.
There you go.
Anybody else have a good question before you let this panel go?
How many cars personally in your collection do each one of you have? And what are they, and are they for sale?
Wait, Wayne, that your wife knows about.
Oh yes.
So my answer to that always is I own way too many, but never enough. And that way there, my wife will never find out. I just bought another Allard the other day, and she came in the garage and she says, "Oh, you painted your Allard blue." Yes, dear.
I have less than 10. That's all I would say.
And all I can say is everything I own is British, so you instantly have to discount it by like a 10th. So, if anyone have one last question here? Fail real quick, Dana.
You have a question?
Continental GT become... Okay. Sorry, I was in a rush, so on your behalf, I know you have to wrap the panel up. But will the Bentley Continental GT become like the 911, where you'd have a badge like that going on for a long time and have collectors, just as they are outside, looking at all the different models within that range? How do you think about the GT?
It all comes down to limited production cars is what it really comes down to. Bentley GTs are great. I'll show it on the field tomorrow, 27 Bentley. I mean, they made less than 1,000 or just 1,000 vintage Bentleys of that era. But the Continental GT is a wonderful car. It's got to be something that's really special in order for it to really grow in value. We said that about Porsches, and look what happened. It's got to be something special now. Every Porsche is worth, much more than it was 10 years ago.
I mean, The real value with Porsche is, I think I said this in an earlier panel, you can take any 10-year-old kid from any city in the US or anywhere in the world for that matter and show him the profile of any year 911 and he'll go, that's a Porsche. And, the problem with some of these cars is they don't just know what they are. Bentley's still around, but it is not something, in the consciousness of most of these cars, of these kids, where they can recognize the car. I mean, you agree with that, Peter?
Yes, absolutely.
And so I just want to say again, thanks to Tom Cotter, who's no longer here. Wayne, obviously, I kid you a lot, but I love you, and you were so adored in the hobby, and I can completely understand why. And Peter, you are a fantastic guy, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Say bye, babes.
Helped a friend of mine sell his
Babes. Bye-bye.
See everybody.
Thank you guys for coming and visit my channel.